have concern about it because people will hear it incorrectly, which I know. Maybe we can set the stage properly.
Okay.
As evolutionary biologists, we are aware of the importance that genes play in the evolutionary story. That is inherent. Understanding what the genes are up to is fundamental to unpacking a question surrounding human reproduction and modern tech and all of that. You have to understand what the genes are trying to do in order to figure out how to position yourself to defeat them when they're up to no good, etc. Right? In no way am I or are we advocating that we do what the genes want done. In fact, we have very directly said we have an obligation. The genes are amoral. What they want is to get into the future. Many of the ways that they get into the future are utterly horrifying and must be opposed for moral reasons. Some of the ways that they want to get into the future are utterly beautiful and should be amplified. It's an a la carte world. We have to choose the things that the genes want that we should agree with, and we have to choose the things that we are forced to oppose for moral reasons. So please don't take anything I'm saying here, because I'm pointing out what the genes are up to, as indicating that I am in any way suggesting we go along with it. But there's an argument I never hear about the question of abortion, reproductive rights, etc. We frequently talk about the need, which some people don't recognize, for an exception to any limit on abortion in the case of rape, right? You and I believe firmly that there has to be an exception. I believe it goes beyond that. This is not that, in fact, the argument for an exception is effectively absolute from a genetic perspective. And the reason for that is that there has been so much rape in human history that we all, every single living human, carries the genetic potential, right? Many of us carry it. We're just carriers, right? We don't transmit it because decent upbringing and all make this a non-issue. Many of us are also women, effectively incapable of rape, okay? But the point is, the genetic potential for rape exists in us because there's been so much rape in human history. And one of the great successes of society is in reducing the amount of it dramatically. By punishing it severely and pursuing instances of it, we drive the amount of it down, which is great, and we should do better. But here's the question. If we do not carve out an exception for a woman who has been raped, right? If we compel a woman to give birth to a child, we say, well, why punish the child, for the sins of the father? Well, it's not a question of punishing the child. Presumably, you should want that abortion as early as possible. There is no child. There's a potential child, but there's no child, and there is a woman, right? She needs to be protected. But more to the point, if you force raped people to give birth to the children that have been produced by this act, you are creating a conduit for any genetic predisposition towards rape to use this strategy to spread itself, right? We cannot open that door, right? We have to keep that door closed. And the way you keep that door closed is you provide the opportunity for anyone who finds themselves in that terrible predicament to terminate the pregnancy, so that rapists are not rewarded, that their strategy cannot work, right? Rape is a strategy for putting your genes into the future by overriding someone else's consent, right? And we cannot allow the genes to find that mechanism, and we cannot allow rapists to figure out how to exploit it, right? It has to be a zero-profit strategy, and that requires that exception.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about it in those terms before, and I think... I didn't know where you were going, and I didn't expect that from you, in part because you and I both, unlike what people expect from evolutionary biologists in general, tend to find genetic explanations for human behavior in many fewer places than most people, including many non-evolutionary biologists. Like, really, we are so much more software, that is to say culture and consciousness, than we are hardware, which is to say genetics, that explains so much of what we are behaviorally, that you will very rarely hear either of us make an argument that there might be a genetic basis for behavior X. And in fact, you didn't argue that there is, or that it is strongly genetically heritable. What you argue it is, given that there might be, and it's also true that even if it's not genetic, that there might be something epigenetically that is conveyed, methylation or something, right? That there is an additional reason to always allow whatever other restrictions there might be, and I would hope that there would be none up through at least the end of the first trimester and perhaps halfway through the second trimester on abortions, that rape victims are allowed exemptions to any restrictions on abortion that there are. Although there will be gray area somewhere later on. In time, right? In the development of the fetus, the zygote fetus baby.
So you're absolutely right. I don't think that there's liable to be. So when we talk about heritable, we're talking about the differences between individuals, and that matters here for reasons that will be obscure to most people. But the point is, you have to have a difference between individuals in their propensity to engage in this strategy at the genetic level in order for it to be heritable in this sense.
Right.
I'm not arguing that I think those things exist. I'm arguing that they might. Mm-hmm. And I'm arguing that if they do, they can't become an advantage, or they will be elaborated. So you're right. You saw exactly why I structured it the way I did. Yep. But I would also point out that given what you and I do believe, which is that, human genes are spectacularly unique in one important regard, which is that they create a mind in which all of the important stuff of humanity takes place on the software side, not the hardware side. Yep. That's the strange and amazing thing about the human genome. But even given that, and even given what it says about where these propensities are housed, the same argument still applies. Right? A rapist who, whether he consciously understands what he's up to or not, is getting off on the idea of having sex with some fertile person and her dealing with the consequences and him walking away. That person needs to know that there is no product of his activity that the state is going to force into being.
Okay, so to your credit, I think you do a terrible job caricaturing the mind of a rapist. But I hear the arguments that will come back, like, rape isn't about sex, it's about power. Wrong. But no one's thinking about whether she's fertile or not. It's like, I don't care what's in the conscious mind of the rapist, and I am quite certain that almost no rapist ever has had anything like the kinds of thoughts that you just imagined were in their minds, not consciously. That doesn't mean that the strategy doesn't exist. Well, let me take away the two negatives. Still, the strategy does exist because it has functioned that way, regardless of what has been conscious in rapists' minds.
Yeah, so I'll say it yet a third way, which is something excites the rapist, and to the extent that it might be the prospect that the state is going to effectively side with them, no, the state has to side with the woman. It's unambiguous, and the degree, let's put it this way, the absurdity of the religious position that would have to exist, and I know it does in some minds, but if you've thought about this issue, right, who exactly is this God that would cause one person to rape another and then condemn the raped person to give birth to the offspring of the rapist? Now, I'm not arguing
God loves her less.
Right. What the hell? What kind of God are we talking about? Or, did your God create a universe in which things happen and they put us in circumstances where we have to make uncomfortable judgments, and this is one of those things?
Right.
I feel like almost all religious people would have to recognize that if they came to the table and looked at the actual, not just the issue that they're focused on, but the other issues that it is in tension with. And in this case, there clearly are other issues.